Before I start, I will try to get the mouse working, and then here we go. Acknowledgements at the beginning, in case I do go over. I just want to thank people on the team. Alchemies of Sen, which is funded by the Czech Science Foundation and is at the Institute of Philosophy of the Czech Academy of Sciences. Martin Janssen is our main computer scientist who's working on the project, who's developing our digital tools. Diana Michkova is the Egyptologist, PhD student who's working, she just finished her PhD actually, who's working on that database with us. And Laura Prieto is the perfumer and chemist who's been working with us. And then Martin, Heike, and Victor are also Egyptologists and chemists who are working on the project, who've all contributed to the results here. All right, so just one thing to say at the beginning is why study the history of perfumery? If you don't think that that's worth studying, I guess we're just going to have to disagree. So I'm going to say that studying them in particular is hard compared to a lot of other things for the same reason that perfumes in antiquity were expensive. And that's that these things are very ephemeral and they tend to disappear quite quickly. And that means it's really hard, for example, to know what an ancient perfume contained by archaeometrical kind of procedures. A lot of times that the main components of one of these things are going to have evaporated long ago. And in fact, in principle, I think it's generally impossible to even know whether we have recreated an ancient perfume. So I want to say at the beginning that what we're doing isn't really recreating the sense of the past. I think that might be a red herring of a question. And instead, what we're trying to do, instead of just looking at the contents of things, is we're trying to understand the procedures that people were up to. What are the kinds of things they were doing, and what are the kinds of results that they thought that they would get out of that? Really the kind of, if we want to use a really anachronistic term, say the chemistry of perfumery in antiquity. And we find these techniques in recipes, and we can learn about the techniques by trying to replicate them. So that's what we're up to in the project. Now, to do that rigorously, our project first has to go back to the sources, both archaeological and textual, and gather all of our starting materials. And that gives us the starting point. So here, on the left-hand side, we, have been to Egypt to start to gather together texts and edit them for various lists of ingredients that were used in kind of religious perfume contexts, maybe making ointments for the statuary. And so we actually have to gather all of those texts and start putting them together and then comparing them with manuscripts that we also go back to find the recipes that are mostly medieval manuscripts that are representing Greek sources, although we do have some papyrological evidence as well. And then from there, we do end up starting to look at the raw materials and collect all of those, which is what you see on the right there. We're playing with some quite fresh myrrh, which still has some liquid residue or some liquid in it, which is one of the things that we're quite interested in. So we have on the one side their textual sources, and on the other hand, we have our material sources, and we try to bring these together some way. And that's kind of where the digital side of things comes in the middle. Now, I asked yesterday for ChatGPT to make me a nice little diagram, so to show the great power of generative AI for the future of digital humanities. You can see it has some troubles with English, but just to say a little bit of what the kind of broad outline of our digital approach is to things. We have kind of two major repositories. On the one hand, we have our sour materials, our source materials. This is just represented on the left. And this is going to be a representation of ancient texts. Usually this will be done in XML and TEI. So we will take manuscripts, we will take Egyptian texts, we will take any text that we can find, and we will have a corpus of recipes. And those recipes are always going to be embedded in the text that they're in. So we don't remove them from the context. So we basically just take all of annotated text, all of Dioscorides, all of Galen's simples, all of Galen's compounds, whatever we can get, and we start to then annotate that in TEI for all the different parts of speech. And we also annotate it to mark out what the recipes are, what the ingredients are, and what the various processes and instruments and all of this stuff are in them. And then we also bring in all of the translations of those texts. So any translations of Dioscorides that are available, any translations of Galen, it's much more rare, but all of these types of things we also bring in. And so then we have a kind of complete set of the texts and how they've been interpreted. On the other side, we have a database. This is an XML database that then contains all of the recipes, all of the entries for ingredients that we're interested in. And we're using XML to make it flexible so we can add elements over time. And then we have links between them. And that's going to be every recipe, every ingredient, everything gets a unique ID that allows us to bring all of those together. And then an interface that allows us to access all of that information. And what this allows us to do is something that's quite unique, and it's what I kind of usually call a historical lexicon, although the terminology is lousy. I don't really know what to call it. But it's basically being able to access every way that someone has interpreted a particular term throughout the transmission history of a text and pull that up really quickly. And then we can also start running computational methods across that same set of data. And the idea is, contrary to what most databases will often do, which is to try to give you one translation of a term and one identification of a term, we're not actually offering any identifications of our own, and we're not offering any translations of our own. We're simply saying, this is what everyone has ever said about this text. And we've just made all of those links clear and open to people so that then they can start to use that data. And the idea in the end is for all of this to be open source so that people can use it and hopefully also add to it. Now, why am I doing that? And we came to this because there are these things that I'm just going to say there are these 4 problems that we come to when we're working with recipes. And these are all like kind of 4 little examples of what these problems are that I'm going to go through. The first problem is the what I like to call the oregano problem. And the oregano problem looks like this. Here is a text. This is from Dioscorides. This is Bellman's edition. And we have something called stacti. For those who don't read Greek, it's this liquid exudate from myrrh trees. And Dioscorides says that the stuff called stacti is the fatty part, the liparon, of fresh myrrh. And when you mix it up with a little bit of water and then press it with an instrument, di organu, that's how you get it. Now, fast forward to a more recent edition. So this, you can imagine there's a press of some kind. You're squeezing the stuff out of after you mix it with water. Fast forward a little bit of time to Aetius of Amida, and this is Oliveri's edition of Aetius. And we have this stuff called stacti. This is just from Dioscorides, is the fatty part of fresh myrrh, which when crushed with a little water and pressed with oregano, gives you the material. And the difference here is between organos, right? Organon, sorry, the Greek word for a tool, and oreganos, which is the oregano, the term. So obviously just one I has slipped in here, a iota, but we still get now a different sense. And the question, right, is really like, well, when is this variant here a textual mistake? And when is this actually something that we need to consider? And we think that one way to answer this question, it can't just be like the oregano case where it's a kind of obvious mistake. Here's our oregano. But sometimes it's going to be something a bit more complicated. And here's an example. Here's recipes for the Susinum perfume. The top left comes from Bellman's edition and the bottom right comes from Sprengel's edition about 100 years earlier. And we'll see that in Bellman's edition, we have myrrh that's being added to the Susinum perfume in 5 drachmas. And in Sprengel's, we're having myrrh that's being added in 5 ounces. Now, 5 drachma is about 36 grams, and 5 ounces is about 136 grams. Mm-hmm. This is a significant difference. Mm-hmm. And we don't know from the text which is correct. Actually, Bellman picks one manuscript, one of the Laurentiana, to use as his kind of prime text. And this is the only one that has 5 drachma in it. All of the others have 5 ounces, but it's still a question which one was the one that we should be focusing on. So that's one type of issue that we come into, the problem of variance. Another type of problem that we come into all the time is issues with authority, or maybe that's just my problem. I'll give you this case from Hortz. He translated the Theophrastus's Historia Plantarum in the early 20th century. And he writes in his preface that it was the kindness of the expert and the expert knowledge of Thistleton Dyer who helped him put together his giant index of plants. He says, I not only owe gratitude for his constant help, but the identifications in the index of plants are entirely his work. So Thistleton Dyer, you might know as also the director of Kew, who helped with the Liddell Scott Jones. And so most of the identifications that you find in Liddell and Scott are Thistleton Dyer's identifications of plants. And this leads to some problems. We don't really know why he made the identifications that he made. Oftentimes we're simply given them. So it's an authoritative interaction between us and Thistleton Dyer. And this happens all the time in botanical references, right? It's always some authority who says, this is the identification I've come to, as if you're talking to the Pythian Apollo, right? Like, this is what it's like. But this leads to some problems. Some of you may have seen me do this slide before. It's one of my favorites. Here we have a big problem I've been interested in. If there are the two bottles of oil around, they're passing around, you'll notice that one of them is a Moringa oleifera, and the other one is a Balanitis aegyptiaca. And you can see that these are quite different oils. But there's some debate about what the Greek word balanos means, when it is referring to a type of oil produced from a seed in Egypt or Syria. Fay in 1833 identified it as Moringa oleifera, and claims that this is the same thing that Theophrastus refers to. So we have several synonyms going around for this. Balanos merepsike, we have Myro-balanon, we just have Egyptian or Syrian balanos, and the oil produced from them. Fay thinks it's Moringa oleifera, doesn't seem to see any problems. But of course, Thistleton Dyer says something different. He says it's Balanitis aegyptiaca, a completely different fruit. And here we have it in Hort, as you would expect to see, because this is Thistleton Dyer's identification. We have an identification from Andre in 1985, where he identifies it as Moringa arabica now. And then we have an Egyptian herbal. This is by Lisa Manigi, and she identifies Balanos as Balanitis aegyptiaca, obviously following the English tradition rather than the French. Here we have Suzanne Amig, who identifies it as a synonym for arabica, peregrina. And it goes on. Here we have the Encyclopedia of Ancient Natural Sciences, where we have Moringa arabica, maybe Moringa oleifera. And now we have the latest edition of Oribasius's this kind of summaries of Galen, where we have Moringa again. Now, which of these do we pick? Just here's Beck in 2020 hedges and just says it's a Moringa species of some kind. When you ask these scholars who aren't necessarily botanists what's going on, like Bostock in 1855, he'll just say something like, there's little doubt that this kind of thing is meant. And I hear that and I say, well, now I have a lot of doubt. Because the two things that we're proposing here, the Moringa oleifera and the Balanitis aegyptiaca, are incredibly different. And it's really difficult to know which, if you look at the botanical identification, why they would choose one or the other. And not only that, but they actually, there's two different reasons why you might call something Balanos merepsike. You might call it this because it has no scent, or you might call it that because it has a nice scent and you want to use it in perfumery. And we get both explanations in our ancient sources for what it is. So, our approach is to say, well, then we just need to record all of these differences and then approach that question empirically. We need to test those things out and see, is there a significant difference? This doesn't necessarily give us an answer to the question which it was, but at least is evidence that we have to consider before we go ahead and start trying to make the identification. But our authorities don't give us this. They'll simply give us what their answer was without giving us any way to question it. Okay, the third problem I like to call identity crises. Here we have, again, the succinum recipe. We'll go back to our myrrh question. And a lot of people who aren't familiar terribly with myrrh outside of a Christmas context will just think it's a nice kind of thing that you burn or you heard about in school or something like this. Now, Comifera as a species wasn't really properly characterized until the late 19th century. People didn't know where myrrh came from in the shops. It was just something you bought, and its actual source was unknown. And now botanists are still working on it and categorizing it. So we have Comifera mirha, which you may have smelled if it's going around in one of the jars. But there were also a couple of other kinds, a Comifera katef, there's a Comifera guidotii. These are all different kinds of conifera that are, similar kinds of trees, but have radically different odorant properties. They smell completely different. And so the kind of product that you're going to get as a result will also be very different depending on which one you use. And this gets into an entire problem of classification, in the same way that we have trouble understanding how people classify ancient colors. We don't know necessarily that our green corresponds to similar terms in ancient Greek. The same kind of category problems show up for smells too. So we needn't assume that what they call myrrh is going to correspond to our species Comifera, or even broadly the kinds of scents that we would expect. Again, so what this means is we need to record all of these different possible identifications, all of these different possible source plants for these materials, and then try them out. The last problem I want to look at is what I call the toll house problem. This is for the North Americans in the room, I guess. There's a famous recipe for chocolate chip cookies that comes out of Ruth Wakefield's toll house in, in New England. What was it? It's got to be in Massachusetts, probably. And she had this little place where you would stop and you would get baked goods, and you could get a lunch there. And she invented the chocolate chip cookie there. Now, if you've ever had a chocolate chip cookie recently, what I tend to think of anyway is something soft and squishy and warm. But look at these two recipes, if you can see them. On the left, we have the original recipe. It's exactly the same as a recipe that was published 50 years later or so, 70 years later, except for one thing. And that one thing is that in the old recipe, you would drop the cookie dough on the sheet by half teaspoons. And in the new recipe, you would drop them by tablespoons. And the difference in this is the difference between a hard, crunchy, almost burnt sugar cookie and a soft, squishy cookie that you dip in milk. Now, the phenomena of these are completely different things. And this is one tiny change, right? And you can imagine TSP and TBSP. This is a very easy mistake for a copyist to make that leads you to something completely different. Now, you could be the philologist and sit there and say, well, what's the text transmission history? And let's find out what we really should expect. You could do that, or you could just try it out and just see what are the differences, and then start to say, okay, well, this is what happens. Now, we do find exactly the same in ancient recipes. Here is the Sucinum, the lily perfume recipe from Dioscorides on the left, and we have Paul of Egina's Sucinum recipe on the right. Now, there's some big differences there in the amounts of oil, but maybe this stuff scales. What's really interesting is the number of lilies that are actually involved. For Dioscorides, we have the petals of 1,000 lilies. Now, we weighed some lily petals, and they're about 2.5 grams each. So 6 of them is about 6 of them is about 15 grams, and multiply that by 1,000, you have 15 kilograms. Now, Paul has a recipe where we're only supposed to have 10 pounds, Roman pounds, which is about 3 1/3 kilograms, 3 1/4 kilograms. And so this is a really big difference in numbers. If you just want to look at it, there's also a difference in the calamus. So if you look at these two recipes, in Dioscorides, we have an oil to calamus ratio in the end that's about 2 to 3, and an treated oil to petal recipe, which is about 1 to 13. And in Paul of Egina, we have an oil to calamus recipe, which is 1 to 1, and we have an oil to petal, which is about 1 to 2.2. Now, this is a huge difference. It is not just a huge difference in terms of the smell, but it's a huge difference in terms of the actual materials involved, the kinds of losses that you would expect if you're coating petals with oil, what the actual extraction procedures are going to look like. I'll show you just a little bit of detail. I don't know how much time I have left, maybe just a few minutes, but here's from. So I don't want to knock anybody, right? This is Jean-Pierre Brun's and Javier Fernandez's book from 2015 on recreating perfumes. Fabulous book. But I do take issue with some things. They try to adapt recipes, and we get this case with the Sucinum, where their recipe includes 54 grams of flowers to 500 milliliters of oil. So that's almost a 10 to 1 in the other direction, right? And if they were actually going to try to do enough infusions to equal the same number, they would have to do about 100 infusions to actually get to the right number. They said that they did 6. So this is a really big difference in the recipes. Now, we tried to do it. Obviously, it would be easier if it were 10-to-1 oil to flowers. We did the recipe ourselves, you know, just to see what it would look like, so I can show you guys. Here we are cooking the calamus in oil. This is what 2 to 3 looks like. You can see how little oil it looks like there is there. You know, try to recover that. It is an incredibly wasteful process. Unless you're soaking the calamus in water to keep the oil from soaking in, you lose most of the oil just going into the calamus, right? So then you start to figure out, okay, so what are they doing here in order to keep the efficiency high? And then you can start to also get an understanding of why these things are so expensive. But you know, if you look at the actual mixing, when we had 5 flowers, which is 30 petals, and that ends up, you know, in proportion 3.4 grams of oil to 17 about 5 flowers, which is about 60 grams of flowers or something like that. This is less than you would put on a salad. Right, so this is what it looks like. So you can see, you don't see any oil here when you cover the flowers with this. How do you get that oil back? How do you get it back with a press? We did, surprisingly, with a lot of work. It's very labor intensive. From the 3 grams, we were able to, which is about 5 ml, we were able to get back about 3. And it actually, you know, the smell carries. It works. The process works in terms of actually being able to get the odorants across. But being able to get the oil back is a trick. So I'm going to say that this is a reason that we should have this kind of a digital approach that I'm about to show you to ancient recipes. One is because we need to record all of the variants, not just some of them. We need to have a tool that kind of records expert disagreement. We need to have a tool that will give us all of the botanical vagueness in one place. And we need to have a tool that allows us to look at recipe variation over time. And then we can start to do lots of really interesting things with that. So this is what we've been working on in the project. And I'll just show you, we've done Dioscorides, and we've been starting to work on it. So we have all of Dioscorides in there. And we also have all of the translations from Berendis and from Beck and from all the way back to Mattiolo that are now inputted in here. And it's actually quite nice because you can very easily just look up any of the ingredients in any language you would like, and you can immediately pull it up. So I'll type in here lily, and I can get my succinum recipe very quickly. And then you'll see all of the different translations that have been offered for it. And we also have all of the raw data. We don't show all of the data we have there at the top right now because we're still working on it. Now, once we go into an entry, I'll switch to the iris now. Once we get into an entry, say for iris, we can start to look at how we can actually start to manipulate this data that we have. We'll click on next translation of the iris, and we'll go in and we'll see that we have a scanned image of the page as well, and we can see where the actual words in the text correspond to the words on the page. So this helps much more for manuscripts and for hieroglyphs. Here's an edition of a manuscript that we've taken. We haven't actually started to link these up yet. We've taken this from the Salamanca Dioscorides, which is another great resource if you've seen this. But we do keep all of the images there so people can just actually get to those really easily. And then we do the same thing also. We don't have the texts all HTR'd yet, but we're working on this. But for now, you can just go to images straight of, say, here's a Venetian Mattiolo. Oh, no, sorry, that's Demelin. That's the French version. And then we can go to here's the late 16th century Czech version of Dioscorides. Dioscorides was translated into Czech, one of the few ancient texts that was translated. And then we can also, with the text that we have done, we can start to align them, and we can see all of the different translations at once, and then start to compare them just visually on the page at one time. And this is all what we can do just, humanly. But once you start adding computational methods to this, it can become quite powerful. And then the last thing that we're doing, as I said, was to do it with Egyptian as well. So if there are any Egyptologists in the room, so when we went, we took pictures of all of the recipes and ingredient lists in Egypt. And now we've started to transcribe those. The paper will be coming in at ZS later this year. You can link up the hieroglyphs and the transcriptions directly between the images and the text. This is all the platform that Martin Janssen has developed. And we can also now, he's been able to make it so that we can see all the parts of speech in the translations for the hieroglyphs. We can actually annotate those to link them up with our Greek text and our Roman text. So now that we can go cross languages and start to see how these things are moving around. And then from there, we also can transcribe the hieroglyphs. For people who are used to working with Egyptian languages, JSESH is the kind of typical way that these things are represented. So we're able to take those and actually make the hieroglyphic images for printing this way. So hopefully this will become a resource for the community broadly to use within the next couple of years. We'll probably get the Diascorides out fairly soon. It's a lot of work. We'll be looking for more funding to kind of keep this kind of thing going. But I just wanted to show you where we're at for now. And thank you all so much for your attention. All right.
Thank you, Sean. We're having discussion afterwards. So I'm giving the floor and the video to Caterina Manco, who is online from Bologna, I think. I don't see her.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Caterina, but we don't.
Yes.
Yes. So Caterina is speaking about because you're worth it, Galen on her. You have the screen, Caterina.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and thanks to the organizers for letting me present today's paper, whose title is Because You're Worth It, Galen on Hair. The iconic slogan of L'Oréal, echoed in its diverse iterations, conjures images of soft and shiny hair, perfectly straight or curly, or with vibrant hues. It highlights, therefore, the importance of the aesthetic beauty of hair, which was an important aspect in antiquity too, if Galen condemns the general views that white hair are distressing in aging women. As Alessia Guardasole said this morning, hair dyes, products to make hair curly, to give them volume or to make them grow, would have categorized by Galen as part of the komotikekia, the flow of embellishment, hiding the real color, texture, and quantity of hair, so important for medicine and helpful to define identity. Here are some examples. Most of you would probably start the description of these babies saying that the one on the left is a redhead, while the baby on the right is a long-haired. Ancient Greek would have called Pyrrhus the first, Tricas the second. It would be more difficult to choose a nickname for a baby with long red hair, but that's another story. What matters is the hair contributes to the construction of identity of both individuals and groups. In the De Temperamentis, Galen writes, for example, that the hair of Illyrians, Germans, Dalmatians, Soromatians, and the entire race of Scythians are of moderate growth, fine, straight, and red. From the medical point of view, a red-haired newborn has a perfectly balanced brain, while a long-haired newborn's brain is hotter and drier than the mean. I will not dwell further on these aspects, since several studies have already explored it, also delving into the blurred boundary between cosmetics and comotics. Rather, we will explore Galen's contribution to the field of trichology in his treatise on simple drugs. In particular, we will present the words designating hair and hair disorders, the remedy proposed, plants in particular, and their routes of administration. In this regard, it has to be said that Galen's indication on administering simples are rare, often necessitating exploration of additional sources for more detailed instructions. Time constraints prevent me from delving into these sources, but you will find references to them in the accompanying slides. In the last part of the presentation, we will also address the question of the presence of commodic products in the treatise on simple. In this text, the only term used to designate hair is trichos, which indicates both head and body hair. In 3 cases, it refers to animals' hair. The other 30 occurrences do not always allow us to understand if Galen hints at head hair or at body hair. Exceptions are those passages where trix is accompanied by other words such as blepharon, eyelids, mascale, armpit, and aidoia, privy parts, which clearly hints at lashes, axillary, and pubic hair. If we look at the 115 entries in Pierre Brulet's Lexicon of Hair, the last part of his book entitled L'essence du poil grec, we can notice that in Galen's treatise, words such as kaide or come lack, or rather, the latter occurs several times, but it is systematically associated with the foliage of plants. In this case, Galen seems to separate the human word from the vegetal one, but this choice seems to be due to the particular connotation of the aforementioned terms. In fact, numerous passages of his works, there are links between hair and plants, starting from the use of the term rhiza, root, which applies both to plants and to hair. In the chapter on pickled shellfishes, eyelids are plucked from the rhizae, their roots. Moreover, the very description of hair is inspired by the plant world. The part stuck in the follicle is like the root of a glass or a plant, the one that protrudes from the skin like the plant itself. In the Decomposizione Medicamentorum Secundum Logos, Galen uses a comparison with plants to introduce the topic on hair disorders. He says that just like plants spoil either dried by the lack of humidity or coming into contact with an humidity contrary to their nature, in the same way, hair too spoil either for the lack of the humidity, which nourishes it, or for its bad nature. In particular, this damage can cause three different affections: phylacrosis, alopecia, and ophiasis. The term phylacrosis denotes the condition of baldness, stemming from a deficiency in the natural moisture essential for hair vitality and caused by an excess of heat or dryness that consumes this moisture. It is not linked to old age, but depends on each individual's temperament. The word phylacrosis, as well as all those of its semantic family, only occurs once in the treatise on simples, in the negative. Thus, Galen's compendium on simples offers no specific remedies for baldness. Bald people would either recourse to wigs or accept their condition, maybe deriving solace from Synesius in praise of baldness. Conversely, the accumulation of bad, viscous, and thick humors is the cause of the alopecia and the ophiasis. These unnatural humors initiate a sequence from scalp discoloration to hair loss. While sharing a common etiology, the difference between alopecia and ophiasis lies in the pattern of hair loss, determining their nomenclature. In the ophiasis, hair loss has the shape of a wave, or as its name implies, of a snake, ophis. The word alopecia, instead, would be inspired by what happens to foxes, alopex. Ophiasis lacks any specified symptom. For alopecia, instead, Galen proposes an array of remedies, including animal derivatives, goat and mouse excreta, hare's head combined with bear fat, goat claws, burnt frog, sea horse ashes, and the alcyoneion, an alcyon nest analog. Plant-based remedies includes abrotonon ashes, a kind of wormwood, mixed with oil, adianton, a kind of fern, asphodelus root ashes, a plant in the genus Asphodelus, Cyclaminus root, a kind of cyclamen, nymphaea, water lily, infused with raw peach, cromon, a kind of onion, fresh stem and leaves of batrachion, a kind of buttercup. Only about these two-letter plants, Galen specifies the methods of administration. The onion has to be wrapped, paratribo, on the patches affected by alopecia. The buttercup has to be put on the affected part, and the application must not last long due to potential skin irritation. The verbs are epitithemi and cataplasmo. All the remedies for alopecia are dispersing with excess humors without being too drying, as natural moisture fosters hair regrowth. Galen delineates another hair disorder, hair loss, termed I-reusaithriches. Within his treatise on compound remedies according to places, he distinguishes this condition from alopecia, attributing it to scalp rarefaction and to the dearth of hair-generating essence. Galen's therapeutic repertoire advocates two herbal remedies for halting hair loss: laudanum, a resin derived from different species of the Chistus genus, and the sawdust of the wood of the Lotostodendron, the nettle tree. These remedies are astringent and moderately drying. In the case of hair loss or even of alopecia, it is necessary to intervene and to stimulate hair growth because, Galen says, the absence of hair, be it on the scalp or the lashes or brows, not only detracts from aesthetic appeal, but also compromises the health of those areas. In addressing these concerns, Galen prescribes only one remedy, blue-colored limestone, notably effective in fostering lash growth. However, also the presence of hair can pose challenges. In fact, as it has been pointed out, if the depilation was perceived as an act which feminized a man, and if one of the protagonists of Aristophanes' Ecclesiazusai throws away a razor to take on the appearance of a man, since changing hair means changing sex and vice versa, then women's hairiness would be denature them. Consequently, Galen also offers remedies for hair removal, categorized as ta phtheironta, and comprising ta psilotra, ta leptuntica, and ta anairetica. While the latter category poses significant risks, inducing blisters, ulcers, or burns, the former two are deemed safe. The psilotra, the depilatories, find widespread use among women and some men. The leptuntica, instead, are thinning agents recommended for individuals with excessively coarse or dense hair akin to swine bristles, a comparison rooted in antiquity as early as Homer's writings. These remedies serve to diminish hair quantity or soften its texture. Moreover, they extend their utility to those weary of razor shaving, particularly around the sensitive throat area. The results in the slide shows that bird trimming in antiquity was not exactly a painless practice, often exacerbated by inadequate skin preparation and dry shaving, leading to frequent cuts and infections. Galen vividly illustrates the depilation scene. Women anoint their bodies, then go to a lukewarm bathroom, and when they begin to perspire, they remove the remedy from a part of their body with a strigil. If they notice that the hairs are peeling off with the remedy, they wash the rest of the body. As depilatory remedies, Galen lists a mineral, yellow orpiment, and 3 plants: the sap of the kissos, common ivy, the juice of titumaloi, a plant in the genus Euphorbia, diluted with oil to temper its strength, the Druopteris, the male fern. In this latter chapter, Galen writes, Dunamin de case septiken, oten kai trigas psiloi, emphasizing causal links between the septic faculty of the plant and its effects on the body by the adverb oten. In fact, all hair removal agents possess either septic or caustic properties, and for this reason, they should not be used often because they can cause permanent hair loss due to root damage. Another word necessitating analysis is geneion. Initially denoting the chin, it evolves through metonymy to represent the bird, as is the case in the treatise on simples. Galen suggests a botanical remedy to foster bird growth, the wormwood. However, this growth can lead to yontoi, a term with dual connotations, representing both the bird and the accompanying eruptions. In the botanical books, the word has this latter meaning, and in this case too, Galen recommends using a plant derivative for its cleansing properties. The verb is aporyopto. The juice of Balanos myrepsyche, mixed with vinegar to make it more active. Let's now delve into the pathologies affecting the scalp: achor, cherion, conis, and phthere. Achor and cherion are akin cutaneous diseases that manifest on both body and scalp, characterized by the presence of orifices expelling humors. While achor exhibits small orifices, while with humors that are neither too watery nor too sticky, cherion, whose name derives from its honeycomb-like appearance, features largest orifices oozing honey-like substances. Though commonly associated with tinea capitis and impetigo or contagiosa, precise identification remains elusive. Against achor, Galen prescribes urine and 4 vegetal remedies: the juice of the pen, the thermoi, and the roots of the crinoi, white lily, mixed with honey. Only about the lupins, Galen says that they must be poured over the affected part. The verb is katanpleo. For cherion, instead, he suggests a single plant remedy, the Veronika, a plant whose identification remains uncertain. Phthere encompasses both head and body lice. In Pseudo-Galen's Introductio Sive Medicus, it extends to eyelash infestations. Their genesis beneath the skin stems from the accumulation of humors. Antoine Pietrobelli reveals Galen's recourse to 2 ancient theories to elucidate lice formation: the theory of spontaneous generation and the concept of humoral coction. Failure to expel coction residues, according to Galen, fosters lice proliferation. Galen presents 3 remedies for eliminating it: 1 derived from an animal source, viper flesh, and 2 botanical solutions: the sap of common ivy and the chedrea, described by Galen as the oil of the kedros, but being a resin extracted probably from the cedar of Lebanon through a process involving boiling and filtration. These plant products also destroy the conis. The chapter on the nettle tree that we mentioned earlier offers us an example of the fact that Galen avoids mentioning commodic products in his treatise. To grasp its use, we have to delve into Dioscorides' De Materia Medica and Pseudo-Dioscorides' Euporista. Dioscorides elucidates that the decoction of the nettle tree sawdust makes hair blonde and arrests hair loss, Xanthizei tricas and Epegei reusas. Galen only retains the second part of the sentence, as hair dye falls beyond the realm of medicine. Conversely, the spurious Euporista accentuates the first part of Dioscorides' sentence, incorporating the nettle tree decoction into a list of blonder dyes. The same happens with regard to the ivy, about which only Dioscorides says that the cluster of its fruits dyes hair black. Nevertheless, exceptions can be found in Galen's oeuvre for different reasons, for example, to respond to the requests of the emperor's family. And this is also the case in the treatise on simples. Galen informs us, for example, that the leaves of the flumos, a kind of mullein, dye hair blonde. Different reasons led to think that this detail is not intended for the emperor's family. They are not the recipients of the text. In fact, Galen says he wrote his treatise at his friend's request. Whether this reference is a literary topos or not, what matters is that Galen's intended audience seems to be composed by students, trained physicians, and perhaps also fathers who are preparing their children for a career in medicine. The second reason concerns the contents. Assuming that Galen has decided to change his mind in order to please the emperor's family, why would he include only 1 dyeing substance? The third reason is about the structure of the treatise. it is not really easy to find information unless you read all its chapters, unlike the treatise on compound drugs, where the remedies are organized according to places on which they act. The fourth and last reason is that at the time of Galen, there was already a bestseller, Kritos Cosmetics, now lost, to which Galen's reader is referred. Suppose that the reference to the dying properties of the Phlomos would not have been deleted in a further phase of revision of the text, as his successor will do, it seems to me that it can facilitate the process of identification of this plant. In fact, there are 5 different plants called Phlomos, corresponding with different kind of mullein, but only the leaves of the Phlomos whose flowers are light gold and which dye hair blonde are particularly dispersing. I skip this example and I go to conclusion. The various hair disorders we have evoked are essentially treated externally, as the use of verbs such as epitidemi, cataplasso, and paratribo shows. The remedies are either used alone or on the affected part, or mixed with other substances in order to give them a more or less pastry consistency, to attenuate their strength, or to make them more effective. Remedies for hair include plants, 2 minerals, and 10 animal products. It should be added that hair itself, once burned, served as remedy for their drying and healing properties. The number of vegetal remedies amounts to 17. Galen proposes different herbaceous plants, or some parts of them, 1 tree, the nettle tree, and 2 derivative products, the laudanum and the kedros. If the choice of particular plants in the treatment of hair disorders is dictated by their symbolic affinity, such as the Venus hair fern, cited for the luxuriance of its frond, or bear fat, an animal notable for its thick hair, modern studies corroborate the effectiveness of some of them. The family business Aroma Valley, for example, advertises a Chistus ladanifer oil, which allows to say goodbye to hair loss. Similarly, a Korean study on a species of Artemisia shows its effectiveness for stopping hair loss. This kind of historical understandings, combined with contemporary validation, may underscore the enduring relevance of ancient remedies in addressing some health-related concern. Thanks for your attention. We cannot hear you.
I was thanking you, Caterina, and telling that the discussion, we will have the discussion afterwards, and now I'm giving the screen to Katarzyna Gromek, who I see, who's talking about precious oil of Alexandria, reconstruction of the salca oil. You have the words and the screen, Katarzyna.
Thank you. I have issue with sharing. I was trying and before, so maybe we'll have to pull out my presentation.
Just a second. This is the one, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm at your service.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. First, I would like to thank the organizers of the 6th Colloquia Ceranea conference for inviting me to present my exploration and reconstruction of the precious salca oil, especially that my background is very different from the background of the majority of participants. I am a molecular biologist, and reconstruction of fragrances is something that I do actually as a hobby after my regular work. While this recipe comes from a 16th volume of Etius of Amida medical work, so this is the 6th century Byzantine work, The reconstruction is based on the 16th century Latin translation and represents the version of this recipe which is several hundred years removed from the original one. Can I have the next slide, please? The recipe itself is for preparation of a large amount of more than 10 liters of fragrant oil, which after accounting for the typical loss would yield around 6 liters of final product. This may suggest that this oil was prepared in volume sufficient for sales or for a very large household. My reconstruction is scaled down to 5.5% of the original volume to allow for easy handling in my kitchen stillroom. There are 17 ingredients in total. I follow instruction on making the nut unguent from the Etios Volume 1 as suggested by the author itself. Can I have the next slide, please? When comparing the three available recipes for salca oil in the Latin translation, the one from Etios Volume 1, so this is the one on the far left, resembles most the recipe from the work of 13th century physician Nicolaus Merepsos. This is the far right. Using the middle recipe, the volume 16. In addition to the Latin translation from volume 16, I also consulted the Greek text from the compilation of the Etios work available online as a part of the Corpus Medicorum Graecorum. And the volume 16 edition was prepared in 1901 by Skevo Zervos, so this is actually quite an old text. Can I have the next slide, please? When working with recipes from the past, substitutions are necessary. Additionally, the 16th century translator openly admitted to not being able to identify the ingredients mentioned in the original works. This ambiguity of identification allows for reconstruction of a recipe in various versions. I decided to use regular virgin olive oil instead of Contagium, the oil from unripe olives. My previous experience in purchasing and using the low-fat content Contagium was unsuccessful. Went rancid before I even had a chance of working with it. Since other recipes for salca oil mention the regular olive oil, it seems like a good substitution. Asparagus is one of the plant ingredients with multiple identification sheets too. While rhizomes of Convolvulus scoparius might be the correct guess, I do not have access to this particular ingredient. In 16th century, the rosewood of Dalbergia odorifera or Dalbergia sisa was also imported. Another choice is Rhodiola rosea, which is also known as Lignum rhodium, the rosewood, and this was my choice for this reconstruction. The identity of leaves, folia, is also contested, while the potential plants are mostly from the Cinnamonum genus. I have chosen the Cinnamonus tamala, the Indian bay leaves, as my ingredient, though it may be interesting to try the leaves of a true cinnamon in the future because they have a very interesting odor. Can I have the next slide, please? The fruits of Commiphora apobalsamum, the Carpobalsamum, are not available commercially in sufficient quantities. If the identification of the apobalsamum source is correct, the experimental orchard in Israel may be able to provide the fruit as a product, though it will come at a premium price. I decided to use a replacement as suggested in one of the books of substitutes from the Islamic and medicinal tradition, consisting on 1/10 in weight of fennel seeds and 1.5 weight of true cinnamon bark. Other substitutions are also possible, as Byzantine medical works, like Paulus Aginata text, often include a chapter on substitution for more exotic ingredients, or ingredients simply not available outside of bigger commerce centers. The olive storax is most likely the resin of Styrax officinalis, which again is not commercially available. I decided to use a relative of Mediterranean storax, which comes from South America. It has a sweet odor with subtle styrene notes. There is another option to consider. For future recreation, it is the resin of Liquidambar orientalis, the sweet gum tree. It grows in the Mediterranean. It was found in archaeological samples of oils dated as far as the 2nd millennium BCE. For the arnavo aromatic, I have chosen Curcuma zeodaria, the zedari roots. Though other potential identification include lesser galangal ginger, greater galangal, or even Thai ginger. I may try to attempt making other variation of salca oil with different arnavo options. and I am awaiting for the publication of new annotated translation of Etius Volume 1, which may offer new identification and new possibilities for reconstruction. Next slide, please. While I follow the instruction given for the nut angent, the first step of stipsis was done in water, and the step 2 in wine. I introduced a change for the step 3. The second maceration was performed in wine. My experience with recreating fragrant oils of antiquity clearly indicates that using wine allows the oil to mature better. The final odor profile is deeper, and it also extends the shelf life of the fragrant oil by many years. The instructions for cooking must be translated as simmering, keeping the temperature of the hot maceration step within 55 to 60 degrees Celsius allows for the best preservation of volatile aromatic substances. My source of the open fire was replaced by a very simple setup, which consisted of a cast iron warmer supplied with a single long-lasting tea light. I mean, I live in an apartment. I cannot have a fireplace or fire. I also treat the recipe instruction as a guidance and not as the absolute. The reconstruction of the salca oil starts with step 1 of stipsis. Can I have the next slide, please? The process prepares the oils for accepting of the aromas by removing the original odor of oil, which is especially important in case of olive oil, which has a very strong natural odor. And it also makes the oil astringent. While this process is very well known from the recipes of antiquity, as best described by Doskonała, the ingredients used for salca oil are quite non-traditional. Well-aged olive rhizomes have violet-like scents, and the oak moss adds the earthy notes to the oil. Next slide, please. The ingredients are roughly ground in a mortar. The black cardamom seeds are first removed from the pods and pretreated by soaking in hot water before further processing. My oak moss was sourced from continental Greece, though I expect that the makers of the 16th century oil were probably using any lichen which was growing around. Next slide, please. All the ground aromatics are transferred to a large glazed pottery container and simmered in water for 6 hours. After cooling, they continue to steep for another 24 hours. And this is how it looks. You can see the oak moss. Next slide, please. After this time, the olive oil aliquot is added to the aromatics. So this is this 0.6 liter of virgin olive oil. And the hot maceration, the hot is pretty much 55 degrees Celsius. It's continued for around 30 hours. As I mentioned, I'm treating the instruction as a guidance, not as an absolute. After the hot maceration is finished, the oil is left to infuse for another 24 hours. Next slide, please. Concurrent with maceration step of the stipsis, a second batch of aromatics, including the sweet flag roots, cloves, true cinnamon bark, and the replacement for the carpobalsamum, so the fennel seeds and the cinnamon bark, are roughly ground. I sourced the cassia wood from China, where it is still used in traditional Chinese medicine. May I have the next slide, please? Okay. So the cassia wood is still used in the traditional Chinese medicine, and this is actually the best source to obtain it. The sweet flag roots were the stipsis aromatic in antiquity, while in salca oil they were moved to the second step, but it's something between the stipsis and the actual perfuming step. Next slide, please. The fragrant wine is added to the aromatics of the second step, and the hot maceration is continued for a few hours. My version of the fragrant wine is a combination of the Falernian wine, made of Aglianico grapes, and the Malvasia type wine, mixed in a 1-to-1 ratio. Falernian wine appears in early Byzantine medical texts quite often, and Malvasia wine was immensely popular in the 16th century books of secret and medical works. After the hot step, the aromatics were left to infuse for another 24 hours. Next slide, please. Next, the oil-water mix from step 1, from the stipsis step, is separated from the aromatic solid matter, the magma, First, by filtering through linen cloth, which helps us to pretty much separate most of the liquid phase. And you can see this linen cloth on a funnel. Next slide, please. The small ladle is especially useful in transferring just the liquid phase, avoiding the plant matter, with less chance to actually clog the filtering unit, the linen cloth and the funnel. And you can see that I was able to recover most of the oil, but not all, as seen in this Florence flask, which has a volume of half a liter. Next slide, please. The oil-water mix is finally recovered from the plant matter by squeezing small aliquots in the cloth. The opaque phase at the bottom, as seen on the far right, is actually a mixture of water, tiny plant particles, and plant waxes, and it's not a problem at this step of the processing. Next slide. Okay. The oil-water mix is transferred to a new larger container, and the aromatics from step 2 are added to the mixture. I use some extra wine mix to recover all the aromatics from step 2 by rinsing the container. Then I process with simmering for around 27 hours to 30 hours, depending on how much time I have, taking care to avoid overheating. And this is the rinsing step of the aromatics from the second step. Next slide, please. Okay, and here side by side, on the left, we have the oil-water mix after the stepsis process, separated from the plant matter. And on the right, we have the mix of the oil, water, and the wine and aromatics. So this is the step 2. Next slide, please. As this is infusing, I'm preparing the aromatics for the final step 3. And here we have the castos, myrrh, zeodari, saffron, and Indian nard that will actually create the final odor profile for the salca oil. Next slide, please. I use the Indian nut rhizomes, though early extant Western texts suggested the use of leaves, twigs, and flowers. These parts of plant contain less substances which are responsible for nut odor and were considered of lower value in the Southwest and Far East Asia, so the source of this ingredient. The root cutters and merchants were quite eager to sell the lower quality product for premium price, and I think that the Western customers were probably the best customers for this. Next slide, please. Okay. The aromatics for step 3 are roughly ground again, and then are let to infuse in fragrant wine mixture for around 40 hours, which is broken in the middle with a few hours of the hot maceration. This maceration pretty much at 55 degrees Celsius. And you can see that it's quite thick because the amount of wine is very low. Next slide, please. Next, the step 3 aromatics are transferred to the pot with the oil, water, wine, plant matter mix. Again, the process of simmering is continued for around 12 hours. Next slide, please. Once I am satisfied with the final scent, as the last hot maceration step can be extended as needed, I repeat the very careful process of filtering the oil mixture and retrieving the liquid phase to the last drop from the plant matter. The more I retrieve, the less losses I will actually have. I let the water and wine and oil phases to separate before I transfer just the upper oil phase to a final storage container. If I abandon this step, the potential contamination with water phase could increase the chances of the spoilage of the fragrant oil, and I want my oil to last for a few years. The final yield was around 330 milliliters of fragrant oil. So this means that I have 55% recovery of the original volume, which is kind of an average value for processing fragrant oils. The odor of the oil actually keeps very well on air. When applied to a freshly washed hair, it is still detectable on the 4th day, so much better than modern products. It would definitely help with maintenance of braids and adding shine to the long hair, and I plan to explore its properties when I go to summer enactment events in summer, when we can actually test it on long hair. Next slide, please. Okay. So while my salca oil doesn't really contain the more exotic latest addition to the aromatic repertoire like sandalwood, camphor, agarwood, or deer musk, it still shares some olfactory similarities with the fragrant oils which are made according to the recipes of the Islamic perfumery tradition. The notes of clove, cinnamon and cassia, costus, Indian nut, lichen, and saffron lead to similar earthy and spicy olfactory profile. Also, the multi-step preparation process of the salca oil resembles the processing of the Islamic fragrant oils. When comparing the recreated oils like the royal perfume oil and royal dune of Ben called Iraqi Barmaki from 11th century Al-Andalus and the Syrian spice oil side by side with the salca oil, many commented how they match each other, how they are very similar regardless of the ingredients used. The complicated processing for the nut unguents and salca oil may have been a later introduction to Etius text. But to really trace the origin of the recipes, it would be necessary to study manuscripts of Etius' medical work, which are closer to the time the text was actually written. And you can see the comparison between these different oils from the most Islamic world. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, to conclude, the goal of this project was to reconstruct the early fragrant oil from Byzantium as seen through the eyes of the 16th century translator physician. I wish I could provide samples of the fragrant oil discussed in my talk, though it was not possible this time. The salca oil shares some other characteristic and multi-step preparation process with the oils of the Islamic perfumery, which when implied that the recipes and manuscripts used for the Latin translation may have been modified at some point to add the concurrent knowledge of fragrant oil processing. While I wait for a miracle of another early Etius manuscript to appear, I am planning to make more iteration of the salca oil, especially that I should have it ready before summer. I would especially like to use only the ingredients which are available in the 6th century. This may require a GoFundMe campaign, as the carpobalsamum and balsamum are going to be prohibitively expensive to purchase. Can I have the last slide, please? Thank you. Thank you for your attention, and I would like to welcome questions and comments during the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Katarzyna. We're all waiting for miracles about manuscripts of issues, I think. So I'm giving the word and the video to an equipe, a group. I don't know if you're the three are here or there's some porte-parole.
Veronika will be the speaker.
Okay, the speaker is Veronika Kelbecheva, but the paper is from Veronika and Gergana, Petkova and Vanya, Ivanova, who are speaking about issues on medical Latin in the context of Bulgarian higher education.
Thank you for giving me the floor. I guess you can hear me well. Hello to all in-person and online participants in Colloquia Ceranea, and warm thanks to the organizers for inviting me to take part in this wonderful event. Will I be able to share my screen for showing the presentation? May I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Does it work?
Yes, on your side
Yes.
it was great.
So you see well?
Yes, yes we can.
Okay, so the title of my topic is issues of medical Latin in context of Bulgarian higher education, and this is a presentation and text that we prepared in common with my colleague Gergana Petkova from Medical University in Plovdiv as well, and Vanya Ivanova, who is teaching at University of Plovdiv. But I'm going to present our work in common on behalf of them both. So this presentation aims at presenting the development of one discipline set in the late 50s in Bulgarian higher education, when medical specialists had to obtain a compulsory class of Latin language specialized for medical purposes. The involvement of this discipline in higher education, in higher medical education, began after an education reform that affected secondary education in Bulgaria and removed from the curriculum Latin and Greek as compulsory disciplines. This was a general transformation of Bulgarian secondary education that mainly affected the organization of state education at schools, because this division of secondary schools to classical, semi-classical, and standard, or normal, as they used to call them. And this division entirely disappeared after the 1944. The secondary education was uniformed as curriculum content in a duration of 4 years. And after 1944, not only Western schools like French college, Deutsche Schule, the German school in Bulgaria, and Italian private colleges closed and vanished from the map of national educative institutions, but the state education also has been transformed. Latin and Greek languages were removed from the programs, and students of the first generations free of classical languages at school in their curriculum graduated. For some of them, the next step in the higher education were the medical studies, and this absence of preliminary knowledge in Latin language provoked a gap in their professional content. Quite soon after, at the medical universities, the discipline Latin and medical terminology was added as a compulsory subject, of course, because it was needed. In the beginning, the discipline in the late 50s and until the mid-80s, the subject was implemented as a 2-year course, and after this period, it was recognized as 1-year course. The purpose of this presentation is to draw a chart of issues and material content that shows the methods, evolution of concepts, didactic instruments, outlay of information, and steps of development of medical Latin thought in medical universities and colleges in Bulgaria from the early times of implementation to contemporary days. So the scope of research here is, first of all, studying the sources for an overview to Latin teaching for medical purposes in the study of all manuals, textbooks, and workbooks that have been published for the teaching purposes. One futurist scientific project of general overview for development of medical Latin in Bulgaria is in preparation, and it is done. It is in preparation in cooperation again with my colleague participating today with me, Gergana Petkova. This study is focused on development of content in issues for medical Latin, scope of presenting materials, and explanation of grammatical base needed for professional use. Some publications that came along in the recent years discussed strategies for classification and ordering of medical Latin, strengthening to put terms into overall constructional frame that allows organization of this knowledge within a lexicological approach. This constructive representation of medical terminology called thermographic strategy aims at presenting the materials, resources of studying lexicography in general aspects. But the available sources like bibliographic evidences have never been collected entirely and studied. One first step to publish resources gives a complete bibliographic list of textbooks, thematic dictionaries, and manuals on the chosen topic. One possible observation for discovering the development methodological practices in a chronological order of the publications is what I'm going to continue with. So the content, the study material, were all the textbooks, workbooks, and dictionaries published since the Latin for medical purposes began in higher medical education in Bulgaria. So what I have mentioned a while ago about the systematic order for classification is made by Nadezhda Amodzieva, who is a specialist on medical Latin, and she is developing this strategy for a classification of medical terms used in medical practice. But one bibliographic overview gives a very profound information about the development of medical Latin through the years. For example, in the beginning of the 50s, first textbooks have been published, like dictionaries for students of medicine and stomatology. This is quite an old term that we used to have, and now after it was changed and replaced with the term dentistry, and now the contemporary one, the present that we use, is dental medicine. So you see that around the 1950s, the first textbooks have been published, and then between the 50s and the 60s, almost the same textbook has been republished with the same content. This is quite an interesting thing, that once it has been published and then it was reprinted without any essential changes for the content. Maybe with the beginning of the higher education of pharmacy, the first textbooks for students of pharmacy came along in 1957, and you see the publications are always from the same source, Sophia, the same publishing house. And then in the beginning of 60s, they continue to be reprinted because it's the same textbook having in mind the author. It's the same author with second edition, third edition, fourth edition, but the same textbook. So one interesting textbook is this one, published by Ivan Popov in the late 60s. We go a bit further on time, and it looks like this. This is the blurb, and here we see that it used to be a textbook for the students in higher medical education, and this universities used to be called in the past institutes, and you see this is the third edition of the same textbook that used to be in the past, published in the past. So the interesting thing, of course, is the content. What makes the big difference between contemporary textbooks that we use at present and those in the past is that the old textbooks used to give small texts or sentences for translation, and the use of verbs was as dominant as the use of nouns and adjectives. But by now, we emphasize only on declensions of nouns and adjectives, and not verbs are entirely excluded. And you see we have citations, of course, in adaptation for an adapted forms, but from the classical authors. And we see that to the medical education by teaching with texts, adapted versions, or made by the authors themselves, is something that was very specific for the beginning of this type of medical teaching at the medical universities. But at the moment, it is completely different. So this form of teaching is entirely. So you see, even not only texts by classical authors were presented in adapted versions, but also some Latin phrases and citations. So I think the manner of teaching somehow, even it was for the medical purposes, even though it used to be for medical at the medical universities, somehow they tried to repeat the general or the ordinary teaching of Latin. So later on, the different type of textbook came in the year 1974, but we have to mention here that this was for veterinary use, for vet medicine, because this speciality was also part of the medical universities in some of them. So it was quite a new approach, but not for human medicine. And later on, in the years 1987, we can say that a new version of Latin textbook for teaching medical Latin came along, and you see we have a considerably bigger authorship here. And all these textbooks used to be for the orientation, and they were relevant to all the students of medical university. Nevertheless, what the specialty used to be: medicine, dentistry, pharmacy or pharmacy assistants or midwives or nurses. So quite late, this division of teaching for specific purposes regarding the medical specialty came along. And in 1977, we have evidences for a new textbook for the institutes for midwives and nurses. So you see, it came quite after the beginning of medical teaching. And one interesting thing about the content is that they still used texts for practical, for practicing, and also quotation from Latin sources, classical sources. You see, all along with the grammatical part, some text using verbs were part of the programs. And nowadays they are entirely neglected. So we can't say that this is something positive or negative, but having in mind this representation of material, trying to represent some original text from the classical Latin teaching, we might say the authorship of these textbooks wanted to bring the students to the original evidences of the language, not only strictly to the practical side of the future professional use. And we have here some pieces of the Codex Sanitatis Salernitanus, which is quite a famous work from the Middle Ages. And you see, we have citations from the original pieces and treatises, so they have been included in purpose. Just to make a comparison of this Bulgarian approach, I'd like to make you see almost the same time to go through a medical terminology textbook published in USA. This was published in the years 1977, so we are talking about absolutely the same period, and we see the same practical approach. The texts of Aristotle, Plinius, and Ovid are given in translation, but the strategy is absolutely the same. This is textbook for Latin for medical purposes, but however, this original pieces of information were not neglected as they are nowadays, or moreover, the contemporary authors avoid to include unnecessary parts in the textbooks. So after through the years, the first, or probably the only one, textbook for medical purposes was published in 1990. So in the 90s, the publication of Latin textbooks for medical purposes is very limited. We can't say why, but probably due to some financial constraints in the 90s, there was only one published textbook, and of course one in 1993. And what came after, like absolutely a new methodological approach, was the division of textbooks and workbooks only with practical exercises. And the first one came in 2011. So now they look like this, one for pharmacists and one for medics and dental medics. And nowadays we have all these variety of different textbooks with different orientation for all the medical specialties, but they are very cautious in including this part of Latin citations or pieces of text that don't have practical part, only for illustration of the Latin language as it used to be, or from the evidences that we have nowadays from the classical period. They entirely avoid to do it, maybe for practical purposes again. And we could not manage without mentioning the newest edition of the Latin textbook for medical purposes, published by my colleagues Mina Petrova and Irena Stankova, a very essential and rich textbook, but with completely different orientation. They emphasize on terminology, grammatical part, of course, and medical metaphors are what is interesting now for the academic environment dealing with medical Latin, not these original treatises where the medical terminology came from originally. And with this, I'd like to say thank you for your attention.
So, thank you, Veronika. Maybe it's better if you organize the discussion from the room, as I do not have any situation in the room. If there's someone who wants to.
Could you please control the online participants? I will keep an eye on mine.
Okay.
So, are there any questions?
So again, thank you very much to all speakers. It was a great panel. And my question is, of course, to you, Sean, about this fascinating database you are building up with your colleagues. And I've wondered whether you found a solution also to integrate or to find a place for annotations, paratext margins in the manuscripts, because this might be very interesting also for the textual tradition and also for the tradition of the formulas and the recipes, because sometimes there is some changing mixing ratio in these annotations. Did you find a solution, or did you?
Well, so the system that Martin Janssen has developed, like this way of doing text corpora, allows for that perfectly. So already we can include paratext with any of these projects. The major hurdle is transcription. So there are now technologies coming out like Transcribus, which was originally an EU-funded project, which has now been spun off. You have to pay a subscription to use it in large numbers. That allows you to start doing HTR quickly, but even that still you have to check, right? Even with an error rate of 99%, that's 1 out of 100 words. It's going to be wrong. If you're thinking of thousands to hundreds of thousands of words, this can be quite something. So it's really, there is still a lot of labor involved in doing that. Technologically, it's quite simple. And footnotes as well, right? So with modern editions, and even kind of like, you know, Renaissance texts, they often have paratext as well. All of that can be included quite seamlessly.
Excellent, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, any other questions? Okay.
There's online Elizabeth who wants to.
Thank you very much. This is a question which is a little bit attached to Professor Stadelman's question, and it is, did you find any evidence in manuscripts of later readers of the recipes who tried to replicate it, to correct them, or something like this?
No, I mean, I haven't really found evidence of too much manipulation. I mean, mostly the texts that we're working on are like that I've actually had much experience with in terms of the manuscripts at all are going to be Galen simples, which isn't going to have a whole lot of recipes itself. Aetius of Amida. So in book 1, we have a whole bunch of perfume recipes lumped into the middle of a section on botanical simples, which is a bit strange. There, I haven't found anything interesting. It would be interesting to look at the Dioscorides transmission history, but I haven't looked at that yet. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the meantime, we will give the rest of the audience. Would you like to pose the questions? Elizabeth?
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so thank you for the interesting presentations, especially for those two which were dealing with ancient perfume reconstruction. And so I just want to talk about your practical experience with it, especially, so as you know, these ancient perfume recipes have a number of steps to do with the material, and I wanted to talk about or discuss the interpretation of these. So firstly, there is this step, the stupsis, which I understand as a metaphor taken from textile dyeing. So when you dye textile, you need to pre-treat it, because otherwise the wool will not take the dye. And so what is your interpretation, Sean and Katerina, in terms of perfume preparation? If we understand that this is the metaphor that the texts are using.
Katerina, do you want to go ahead and respond?
I can answer. So I think that this process can be more called, I mean, stipsis is what the word that is used in texts of antiquity, but I think that what it is mostly, it's very similar to preparing textile for dyeing. This is pretty much, for me, it's a canceling the primary original odor of the oil itself. And especially if this process is done with wine, it's very efficient. So, I mean, you can completely remove, for example, the olive oil. And I am not really surprised that the Ben oil, the Moringa oleifera oil, was later on used in the, especially in the Islamic perfumery, because it has much less odor of its own. So it doesn't require this kind of extensive preparation.
Yeah, so this was my experience as well. I tried making a Roman perfume recipe, both with Moringa oil and olive oil, and yes, that's what I found as well, that the Moringa is much better. And but also, I mean, yeah,
I have recreated some of the fragrances of antiquity in olive oil, and they are now getting close to 8 years. So I'm pretty much observing how they change over time, and they're all prepared with this original odor canceling step, let's call it stipsis, and they're still maturing. They're not yet pretty much reached, I think, the peak of the fragrance. So I think that it's all about how the preparation process is done. But yes, less energy is used to prepare the ben oil of the balanos.
I would just add, I kind of agree. I think there's one thing that I would say is that this process of stipsis, and we've been working on this a little bit, and we should have a paper coming out soon on this, is also used in certain other contexts. In particular, if you look at the two manuscripts that were mentioned earlier, the papyri of the Stockholm and Leiden text on dyeing, you will find stipsis there being mentioned in the context of dyeing cloths purple, and also in the context of dyeing stones to look like gemstones, to look like other ones, so making false or artificial amethysts, artificial emeralds. Stipsis is used in these contexts as well, and it seems to be a general term for preparing a substrate, not necessarily to make it odorless, or to make it qualityless, because there's many cases where you will be imbuing a certain quality that when you add the thing that you're looking to make, it will then change it correctly. And I'm thinking of the hair dye recipe that we saw earlier. If you use oak gall and iron sulfate, you will get a quite dirty color. But then certain changes will happen, especially under oxidation, that will lead to a dark insoluble ink. So you might think something similar is going on in perfumery, where the goal isn't necessarily to create an odorless oil, that would be washing, but that it's to create some quality that will then interact with the quality you add later to get some new desired result. That's another possible reading, just to put on the table.
Yeah, just finally, I want to ask about two final possible steps, which I haven't tried myself. I just want to know if you have some experience. And those two final steps may be thickening the oil with the addition of resin, and coloring the oil, which is not a requisitum for all the ancient perfume recipes. I think they colored rose oil red, if I may remember rightly. Mm-hmm. So have you tried these steps?
I haven't. I haven't tried coloring. So the perfumes we use don't use a lot of color. Katarzyna, have you tried doing any of that?
Yes. So I actually tried the step of thickening with myrrh for the crocinon, for the saffron perfume. It's pretty much added as a last step. So the resin, the finely powdered and sifted resin, is like pretty much kept in a bottle or the container of the perfume to age it. And you are supposed to mix it, and I of course didn't mix it all the time, probably every day, and it's now like more like a stone at the bottom of the bottle. But you can still, like when you mix it, you can still like smell this myrrh trying to come through the saffron. And also I used, so when I make crocinon, it's naturally yellow because of saffron, because saffron is pretty much the second to the last steps. So you pretty much add the saffron to infuse, and it dyes the color like the oily yellow. I also made the rodinon, the rose oil, and I was using for this alkanet, and it actually came quite dark red. I mean, but surprisingly, it doesn't. For example, if you immerse a piece of cloth like linen, it doesn't give a very intense color after you like rinse it away. And it also doesn't dye the skin itself very much, but I think it looks attractive when it's red. And most of the, I think that when I was creating the Bronze Age fragrances based on archaeological discoveries, they didn't discover any dyes, but the recipes from Pylos mention some dye. So I actually tried to use madder and also alkanet, and both seems to be working well and dye red, but it's not really visible on the skin. So the oil is red, quite red in a container. So especially it looks attractive when it's like in a glass bottle, but it doesn't transfer to the skin as much as I was thinking it would.
Thank you. This has been extremely interesting. So you've pretty much answered my questions. Thank you.
A quick comment for Veronika. Thank you, Veronika. Are you hearing me? Thank you for bringing this subject to our attention. I can speak for the Latin Wikipedia. I work particularly on finding modern scientific terminology for our new encyclopedia. It is because of medics in Eastern and Southeastern Europe that medical Latin is still in use, really. And if we want to find the names of diseases, for example, we can go to a database on the names of diseases in all sorts of languages and their classification, but to find a Latin version of those, an up-to-date Latin version, we have to go to databases in Eastern Europe, in Poland, Slovakia. Maybe there's one in Bulgaria too. I haven't found it yet, but perhaps there is. And it's so great that Latin continues in use as an auxiliary language there. Just to add a point, we have it so good for plants, animals, and microbes. All of those, there is no other language in which they have all been named except Latin. But for the names of diseases, it becomes more difficult to find an up-to-date list. So again, it's good that Latin continues to be used in Eastern Europe.
Thank you for this comment.
Okay, one more question from both.
Thank you. I would like to pose a question to Dr. Gromek, and if I have the time to Sean, but first to Dr. Gromek. Dr. Gromek, congratulations. I would just like to ask you this. You referred to the use of Malvasia wine. What exactly do you refer to? I mean, what is the product that you used?
Oh, okay. So Malvasia wine is a general name for a wine that's made of this type of grapes. So it's pretty much the name of wine came of a type of grapes. And this was kind of a wine that was white, usually white, on a sweeter side. And this wine seems to be very popular, especially in high medieval period and in the Renaissance. And it was coming from Italy, but also from Greece. And I would love to have access to wines that are recreated like in a type of antiquity or in a type of Byzantine wines. I know that there are wineries in Europe that make wines like this, but they don't ship it to US. So the formulas call always for fragrant wine. Sometimes they mention Falernian wine that's made from Aglianico grapes. So I decided to pretty much mix this Aglianico type and Malvasia type grapes together to have a very fragrant, pleasant wine. Okay,
if I may, the designation Malvasian wine is the one primarily concerning a wine coming for Monemvasia or Monemvasia. Okay, we have the first written testimony to this wine, which dates to the early 13th century. Then the Monemvasian wine becomes a Cretan wine, Malvasia, and then the Cretan wine exported by the Venetian-dominated Crete to all over Europe becomes Malmsey. If you are referring to Malmsey, the Malmsey wine does not have the exact properties of the Monemvasian wine. As far as I know, the only winery that nowadays makes a Monemvasian wine is the Tsipidis winery in Monemvasia, and this is a protected designation of origin. You know, because it is the sun-roasted variety. It is very sweet.
So I don't know exactly how, I mean, I buy wine that's made in California, and they claim that this is exactly the same grape type that it was used in Europe. I am not a specialist on wine, so I have to trust what they sell. And please understand that whatever is designated and protected in Europe is completely not protected in the US.
I'm talking about the very properties of wine. Sure.
If I may, just, sorry, the Malvasia wine of California comes from a variety of Malvasia Sicily. Do you still one more?
So defend the presenter. Well, that the variety of grapes isn't so important. The actual production process is important, and using dried grapes, raisins, this is something that gives you the same type of the sweet wine that you mentioned. Yes.
Not every sweet wine is Malvasian wine.
Excuse me?
Not every sweet wine is Malvasian.
Yes, of course. But Malvasia is like the most popular Malvasia, which was probably meant to be there. It was the Discreta Malvasia, which was popularized and which then changed in Malmsey in the UK. Well, when it's reached. So actually, it's okay to use any grape variety to make this. Just important is to make vino passito, so this kind of sweet wine.
This is important for historical rehabilitation.
Okay. In this case, but okay. In this sense, yes, but like the organoleptic and other types of properties would be the same because of the process. Okay, Professor Guardasole?
Yes, I just have two brief questions. The first one for Caterina Manco, because she pointed out extremely correctly that the scalp pathologies are for Galen and for ancient medicine humoral pathologies, because there's a problem on humoral presence in the scalp. And she pointed out that the remedies are mostly external remedies. We have to add that Galen records an internal therapy. The only case we have in compound drugs, according to places, with the regimen by Asclepiades of Bithynia. And so we have a different case of internal therapy without external therapy for the scalp pathologies. And the second one is for Veronika, and I wanted to know if is there any place in these manuals for Hippocratic aphorisms, because the form of the aphorism was the best form for education and for medical education. As you present us the regimen sanitatis Salernitanum, I wondered if you have any Latin translation of Hippocratic aphorism in the manual. Thank you.
I start, or Veronika, do you want to start?
Well, you go ahead, Caterina, if you feel like.
Okay. Thank you, Alessia, for this comment. The paper was on simple drugs, and I not well on compound remedies, but thank you. I will focus on Asclepiades to foster my research. Thank you for your comment. I'm sorry for not. My camera is switched on, but it doesn't work. I see. I'm sorry.
Thank you for your wise question, Alessia. In fact, in some of the old textbooks, of course, there are some citations from Hippocratic aphorisms, but they are given through Latin. Probably some later Renaissance translations have been used, because however these textbooks are Latin textbooks, and the Greek language in some of them is presenting only like alphabet and phonetical transmissions from Greek to Latin, and that's why all from the Greek authorship is given through Latin, and even the Hippocratic Oath is is given into Latin, but of course it used to be thought. I'm repeating, these are evidence only in the old textbooks. In the modern, I think the practical side is mainly emphasized, and this has been excluded.
Thank you.
Okay, and Jakub Wedrosz?
Yes, I've got one question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got rid of the camera. I had to switch the place, and I'm now just with the microphone. But I wanted to ask a very, very short question about Malvasia. Ms. Katarzyna Gromek, you mentioned you were using Malvasia, and this is extremely important to me, as I'm also working on I'm working on early modern recipes where Malvasia is extremely popular. But these are 16th, 17th century texts, and when they state Malvasia, it's a sweet wine. And there was someone in the room, but well, the camera doesn't show us. We are online participants. Doesn't show us who exactly was the person who had some information on Malvasia. And I would really appreciate if you could give me any feedback on what is actually a Malvasia in ancient history and in early modern period, because nowadays a sweet wine from Malvasia is possible to be bought, and we did use one, because most of the Malvasian wine in Europe are not sweet, but it is possible still to buy a sweet wine from Malvasia. So if I could get any feedback on that, I would really appreciate.
Do you want to come up, Rasmus? Do you want to come up here so you're on camera?
Yeah.
Like come up and so he can see.
No, I'm very sorry. Actually. So thank you. Thank you. You could perhaps give your email to the organizers, and I would very gladly give you bibliography on this issue. But I have to say, right in front of everyone, that the very specialist on Malvasia wine is Elias Anagnostakis. So, but we can be in touch.
Okay, I'm really thank you very much. I don't know who I'm speaking to.
Or Gerasimos Meriamos. So thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I can only mention that the wines that are made in California and also in Chile from Malvasia type grapes, they're all very sweet. They're strong and sweet. I don't know how they make them, and of course, I mean, any trademarks, any protected designations from Europe don't really matter here, but it's definitely a very sweet, fragrant wine.
So, okay, do you have any questions from food? I cannot see from the online participants. Okay. So, thank you for one of the sessions.